I didn't get into this business by being an airhead or a screwball. My attitude was always, if it's real, it can take the pressure. You know, you don't have to pussyfoot around the real thing. If they're telling you, you know, oh, you must lower your voice and avert your gaze or this and that, then you're probably in the presence of crap. Because the real thing is real. It doesn't demand that you adjust your opinion to suit it. It's real. That means it is preeminent. That means it sets the agenda. And I studied yoga. I wandered around in the East. I was fast shuffled by beady-eyed little men in dhotis. I know the whole spiritual supermarket and rigmarole, and I find nothing there to interest me on the level of, you know, 5 grams of psilocybin mushrooms in silent darkness. I mean, that's where the pedal meets the metal. That's where the rubber meets the road. And the inspiration for me to get up and talk to an audience like this simply comes from the fact that I cannot believe that this could be kept under wraps the way it has. I mean, I kidded with you earlier that they would make sex illegal if they could. Well, they can't, so it isn't. But the psychedelic experience is as central to understanding your humanness as having sex, or having a child, or having responsibilities, or having hopes and dreams. And yet it is illegal. Citizens don't take psychedelics because it's illegal. Neither do marionettes. Neither do robots. None of these well-behaved and mechanistic reductionist images of humanity take psychedelics because it's misbehaving. Misbehaving is a great sin. In fact, it's enshrined as the first sin. You'll regard that the psychedelic issue was there in Eden, and somebody misbehaved, and then they got tossed out forever, and their children's children, into the chaos of history. It's interesting to read in Genesis why this was. It was because they will become as we are, says Yahweh. They will become as we are if they eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge. I suggest to you that this is precisely what we should seek to do. We empower our experience by insisting on our authenticity. It's a wonderful thing to learn to be able to stand up and yell bullshit, because so much is being slung and nobody is talking about the primacy of experience and the dignity of the individual. The dignity of the individual. We went a long way with this in America before we betrayed it. And it wasn't only betrayed by the clowns in Washington. It's also betrayed by anybody who clusters themselves around the feet of some self-proclaimed nabob. Because the fact of the matter is, nobody knows what's going on. Nobody knows. Nobody has the faintest idea. The best guesses are lies, you may be sure of it. And so to pretend that one human being will lead another out of the dark night of ignorance and into the shining light of truth is ludicrous, absolutely grotesque, a product of this empowering of the human image that has gone on through several thousand years of dominator culture. If you want a teacher, try a waterfall, or a mushroom, or a mountain wilderness, or a storm-pounded seashore. This is where the action is. It's not back in the hive. It's not in the anthill. It's not knocking your head against the floor in front of somebody who claims that because of their lineage and whose feet they washed and whose feet they washed, that you should give credence to them. Knowledge is provisional, and we are yet to approach even the first moment of civilized understanding. The way it is to be done is by trusting yourself, trusting your intuition. Reject authority. Authority is a lie and an abomination. Authority will lead you into ruin. It's not real. And it isn't, don't get the idea that it's this liberal rap about how everybody has a piece of the action. You know, the Jews know something, the Buddhists know something, the Huichol know something. Nonsense. Rubbish. Nobody knows anything. These are different kinds of shell games that have been worked out by priestly castes of people to keep things under control. Institutions seek to maximize control, control, control. That's what they're into. Did you think they were in the business of enlightening you? Saving your soul? Forget it. Control is what this is all about. And to the degree that we commit ourselves to ideology, we are poisoned. Any ideology, Marxism, Catholicism, objectivism, you name it, rubbish, all rubbish. What is real is experience. What is real is this moment. And so then what it becomes about is, what are the frontiers of experience? How much of that has been taken away from us by these dominators, by these priesthoods, by these cults, by these philosophical shell games? Well, a lot. That's the whole story of history. Our growing unease, our growing dis-ease, our malaise is all about the fact that we are kept from the wellspring of experience. We are sexually repressed. You may not feel it, but look back 100 years to a world where pianos wore pants. You know, maybe we've made a little progress on the sexual thing. Maybe not. Maybe more or less than we think. But we are repressed in all of these areas. And we are particularly repressed in the area that relates to the psychedelic experience. Because it is raid to the dominator insect invasion. They can't take it. They can't stand it because it empowers the individual. It dissolves the cheerful model of science. It's just exposed as, a nice story. It enriches the accessible universe tenfold, 100-fold, 1,000-fold. It makes the individual complete within his or her self. And this completion of the individual is extremely destructive to the plan of the dominators, which is that you will be a cog in a machine. You will participate in the life of an organization. Not your life, the life of an organization. You will go to some bullshit job. You will pour the best years of your life and your genius and your hopes into this. You will serve an institution. You will serve. Well, it's a bad idea for free people to go along with this. A much better idea would be to insist on the dignity of human beings, to recognize that the freeing of slaves, the giving of the vote to women, the ending of public whippings, that this program of political enlightenment must also then include hands-off on how people want to relate to changing their minds. We are not interested in being sexually regulated by the state, and we are not interested in being intellectually, spiritually, emotionally manipulated by the state. The state should stand down in this issue. The state is acting as the enforcing arm of the dominator culture, specifically of fundamentalist screwballs who, are horrified by all this, by the notion that people would claim the authenticity of their own minds, that people would stand in the light of nature and reject original sin and the guilt from Eden and, the sins of the fathers and all this rubbish which is handed down. What the archaic revival is going to have to mean, if it has teeth, is a re-empowering of the individual and a consequent lowering of the profile of institutions, especially government. We need to think about these things because we have bought into the idea that we have to serve and behave and be enslaved, else chaos will engulf the world. We need to carry out our analysis of the situation to the point where we can embrace chaos and see that chaos is the environment in which we all thrive. If we continue as we have, then, we're doomed. And the judgment of some higher power on that will be, they didn't even struggle. They went to the boxcars with their suitcases and they didn't even struggle. This is too nightmarish to contemplate. We're talking about the fate of a whole planet. Why are people so polite? Why are they so patient? Why are they so forgiving of gangsterism and betrayal? It's very difficult to understand. I believe it's because the dominator culture is increasingly more and more sophisticated in its perfection of subliminal mechanisms of control. And I don't mean anything grandiose and paranoid. I just mean that through press releases and sound bites and the enforced idiocy of television, the drama of a dying world has been turned into a soap opera for most people. And they don't understand that it's their story and that they will eat it in the final act if somewhere between here and the final act they don't stand up on their hind legs and howl. So this whole effort to bring the psychedelic experience back into prominence is an effort to empower individuals and to get them to see that we are bled of our authenticity by vampirish institutions that will never of their own accord leave us alone. There must be a moment when the machinery and the working of the machinery becomes so odious that people are willing to stride forward and throw sand on the track and force a reevaluation of the situation. And it's not done through organizing. It's not done through vanguard parties or cadres of intellectual elites. It's done through just walking away from all of that. Claiming your identity, claiming your vision, your being, your intuition, and then acting from that without regret, cleanly, without regret.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of After School. If you enjoy the art on this channel, then you will most certainly enjoy our prints, shirts, and kids book. The prints are all taken from some of the most memorable sections of our favorite animations. These are sure to add life to any wall in your home. We also have a simple selection of shirts and hoodies available, so you can rep after school out.
My I should say, I guess, a little bit about myself, since this has sort of, over the years, turned into a kind of a one-man band. I grew up in a small town in Colorado, under extraordinarily ordinary circumstances, and for some reason, I don't know, genetic or something in the water or something, I was always very prone to obsession. And one obsession gave way to another, so that rock collecting gave way to butterflies, which gave way to rocketry, which gave way to girls, which gave way to drugs, which gave way to politics, on and on and on. Fascinated with the world, and as a rock hunter and butterfly collector, it was fairly aesthetically driven and irrational. What interested me was the iridescence in certain agates, certain pyrites, certain tropical butterflies, certain kinds of reef fish, something about the light, the visual thrill of the world. And this took me through many places by the time I was 14 years old, and read Aldous Huxley's book, The Doors of Perception, where he gives a very restrained and gentlemanly description of a mescaline experience. And I took it at face value and said, you know, if this is even partially true, it's immensely important. And I began to pursue this vast area of interlocking disciplines that really has no name, but we can name the disciplines, and you know what I'm talking about. Botany, ethnography, chemistry, DNA function, cultural dynamics, shamanism, linguistics, theories of natural magic, relationship of man to the environment, so forth and so on. The nexus of concerns that clusters around the question, what are we? Where did we come from? And where are we going? And as a 14-year-old, 16-year-old, when these questions first form in your mind, a reasonable response is to seek the cultural database. Surely there are answers to these questions. Who are we? Where did we come from? And where are we going? Well, if you have any kind of intellectual filter at all, you quickly can satisfy yourself that our best efforts are nothing more than half-completed stories told around the campfire. We don't actually know what our predicament is. I mean, we are up against a phenomenon which we can barely bring into focus in our cognitive sphere, and it's the phenomenon of our own existence. You know, what does it mean? What does it mean, first of all, to be a biological creature, to be as an animal? what is that? And then, what is it to be that embedded then in a culture with histories and languages and aesthetic canons and literatures and scientific hypotheses about the cosmos and so forth and so on. And my personal journey, if you want to put it that way, lay through a successive series of, I almost said disappointments, but awakenings could be another word, as I realized that nobody has their finger on what's going on. These religions that are so freighted with their own pomposity are no better than inspired guesses. And science works its miracles by turning its enterprise into a kind of parlor game confined to the category matter and energy. So you can live and die inside these intellectual structures if you choose to. But people of curiosity, people of unusual or traveled circumstance, usually find themselves unsatisfied with the conventional answers. And then, on top of all that, you can add the fact that over the last 100 years, what has come into the toolbox of thinking Westerners is a whole array of consciousness-altering substances that were not there before. And they accelerate, accentuate the dissolution of sanctioned paradigms, basically. In other words, all these things you might cling to, Catholicism, democratic ideals, Hasidism, Marxism, Freudianism, all of these things are exposed as simply quaint cultural artifacts, painted masks and rattles assembled by people of good intent, but clearly not great grasp of the situation. Well, I thought that process of deconstruction of cultural reality would end in a kind of liberation of cynicism, where you become sort of really street smart. Nobody can put anything over on you. You've been there. You've done that. It turns out that existential phase, which I reached at about age 18, is itself simply a place along the way. And that persisting then with pushing into altered states of mind and alien cultures, I began to see that there was a landscape of meaning, but it was not the meaning that I had ever been told. And this was fairly shocking to me, because part of my intellectual journey had been through the psychology of Carl Jung. So I was very prepared for the idea that all dreams, all religious mythologies are seamlessly connected to each other under the surface. And liberalism takes the generous position that everybody has a piece of the action. The Buddhists understand something, the Taoists understand something, the Kabbalists understand something. I was getting a different message. I was getting the message that nobody understands anything, that the entire cultural enterprise is 180 degrees cockamamie to the truth, that we have it absolutely ass backwards, that to date the enterprise of thinking has moved us radically away from understanding anything. And over the years I've tried to make room for this alternative explanation. And I suppose this is the proper place in all this to make my standard disclaimer against squirreliness. There's a lot of squirreliness in this world, a rising tide of it. Some of it has been fomented not far from where we sit this evening. And I represent to myself, and I hope to convince you of this, radical ideas, innovative ideas, even peculiar ideas, but not loose or preposterous ideas. And it's sort of like, as Supreme Court Justice Douglas said of pornography, it's hard to define, but you know it when you see it. And that's so. As sanctioned paradigms break down, science and religion, which certainly are breaking down, into that vacuum rushes an incredibly exotic menagerie of intellectual freakery of all sorts. And so what you have to call into being to deal with that situation are rules of evidence, tools for telling shit from shinola, in other words. And though what I will say here may sound peculiar, none of it is beyond the realm of testability. And none of it is riddled, I hope, with contradiction. So these weekends serve different functions for different people. Just in the course of doing what I've done with my scene, I know a lot about plants and anthropological use of psychoactives and chemistry and anecdotal stuff, and I'm very happy to share all that with you, right down to recipes and how to do it, because that's very important to empower people's personal toolkits and technology. At first I had great enthusiasm for that part of the teaching process because I felt I was alone in trying to get high doses of psychedelics and pay attention, that this was not a party experience. This was something at the edge of metaphysical profundity. It now appears that psychedelic exploration is alive and well, enshrined in the culture as a 3% minority to be tolerated approximately with the same lesson granted to advanced S&M practitioners. So that has been taken care of. And so what interests me more now is, for me, what all these years of psychedelic taking came to was a new model of how reality works, a new model of what the world is. And several people in Going Around the Circle referred to it tonight as the time wave, or talk about time and the I Ching. I represent remember when we were kids, or it still continues today, but there is a genre of cartoon of the bearded, corpulent man in the robe carrying a sign which says something, usually "the end is near and repent." Well, how a rationalist, a Platonist, and an admirer of all kinds of evidentiary veracity could find their way into that position, I don't know. But that is the position I'm in. I really am quite convinced, I wouldn't say 100%, but that what we are experiencing here at the end of the 20th century, which we call chaos or cultural speed up or globalization or just the concatenation of multiple social crises, is in fact something far more profound than a mere crisis in our politics or our management styles or something like that. That it is that the cultural world, the world of human culture and history, is reaching some kind of climax at the same moment that the biological evolutionary process, which has been working on this planet for 4 billion years, is also reaching a climax. And both of these simultaneous trajectories toward breakthrough are occurring in a yet larger context where the very laws of physics itself are undergoing some kind of a local phase shift or transformation. And I am completely aware of how nutty this sounds at first. I mean, any problem you have with this, I had in spades. First of all apocalyptic theory always centers on a moment not far in the future. There's never been any percentage in saying the earth is going to end in 50,000 years. There's just no juice in that. Nevertheless, when you begin comparing ontologies, you've got to always remember this is not a free-for-all. There are only a certain number of intellectual products on the market. What is science selling? Science is selling the idea that some time ago, for no reason, the earth sprang from nothing in a single moment. Well, now, whatever you may think about that idea, notice that it's the limit case for credulity. Do you understand what I mean? I mean, whether it's true or not, it's the most outlandish explanation for reality possible for the human mind to conceive of. And that's step one with science. So what does this do? What is the consequence of this scientific worldview? A progressive marginalization and de-emphasis on what it means to be a human being. Because the universe is enormous in space and time. Our galaxy is utterly ordinary, one of billions. Our star is utterly ordinary, one of trillions. Our planet is presumed to be of an ordinary type, and biology is presumed to be a necessary consequence of certain chemical regimes at certain temperatures, and on and on and on. So what you get then as the human role in this scientific scheme is virtually nothing more than to witness, to carry out certain measurements that cause the collapse of the state vector, and to witness. And the universe is an accident, and all subsequent processes are accidents, and we are an accident, and value is conferred, and meaning is an illusion of the naive, and on and on and on. This is the legacy of positivism, materialism, the thinking that has gone on in the last 200 years in Europe and now dominates the planet. The problem is that it runs completely counter to the primary datum, to use a philosophical buzzword, the primary datum. And what is the primary datum? It's the felt presence of immediate experience. In other words, being here now is the primary datum. And it doesn't tell you that this is a series of accidents, and that you are irrelevant, and that your pain is not pain, and that your hope is not hope. It tells you something else. It tells you this counts. Somehow it matters. I matter. My life matters, my family, culture, the human enterprise, this planet, its biota, this matters. It all matters. Meaning is intrinsic as a primary datum, and yet it's denied by the philosophy which rules this planet and sets its agenda. How this happened we can talk about tomorrow. It's an interesting story of historical malapropisms and bad calls and lost opportunities and just bonehead stupidity at critical junctures. But this evening what I want to evoke for you is what are its consequences. We need a metaphor that can contain the demon of the future that we have conjured into being. Fine-tuning the institutions built by powdered-wigged guys 200 years ago is a long shot at holding the whole thing together. The world is entering into a phase of progressively more chaotic oscillation. This is not a consequence of what human beings have done. It's part of the dynamics of the human biological, geological matrix that represents the planet. Biology never stands still. It moved from the unicellular phase into the multicellular phase. It occupied all niches. It left the oceans. It occupied the land. It then entered into linguistic phase space. It entered into the domain of meaning, and there it erected conscious, reflecting societies and individuals. Now, through the catalytic interaction with technology, the human species is getting set to redefine itself. And these phase transitions are major. In the life of this planet, which is 4 billion years, we can probably look back to no more than half a dozen of these kinds of phase transitions. Well, now I want to return to a point, which was the unlikelihood of apocalyptic transformation in our own time, using a kind of reductionist argument that there is so much time and a life is so short that the odds that your life would fall on the golden moment is very slight. But that's not true if the dice are loaded. And the dice are loaded. This melting together of technology, this globalization of culture, this creation of an electromagnetic sea of information, these are phenomena that only happen in the terminal moments of the planetary breakthrough. History itself is the shockwave of eschatology. This is the slogan that I've been building to deliver to you. History is the shockwave of eschatology. If you don't know what eschatology is, it's a good old theological word. It means the final things, the last things. And what I have learned from psychedelics, and I'm convinced of this to the bone, whether my own mathematics can stand the test or not, but time is not necessarily